Hello readers by eyes and by ears, this is Madi Chen and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today we are continuing the reading of Thousand Autumns Volume 5, also known as Tiěshí by Meng Xi Shi, and we're covering chapters 123 through 125. I'm very excited, so without further ado, let's just get right into it, okay? Oh, and as always, I hope you all enjoy! Chapter 123. Goodwill Abounds. Since he just admitted a new disciple as the Shifu, he couldn't just up and leave. Shénnүү personally introduced Shénnű's Violet Palace sect rules to Duanying, then briefly explained the situations of Shiwu and Yuan-song. Duanying took note of everything, listening intently. "I'll be away," Shénnүү told him, "but you must not neglect your studies because of it. I'll have Elder Kong teach you the internal and mental cultivation techniques of our sect, as well as the Azure Wave sword technique. Every morning, your martial siblings will wake up to practice the sword, and you should participate as well. I will check on your training upon my return. If you make good progress, I'll teach you the next stage of martial arts. Aptitude is indeed important for martial arts practitioners, but diligence can make up for any shortcomings. You must remember this. Though you're not the strongest when it comes to talent, it's still above average. If you can study and practice diligently, great achievements may very well be in your future." "Yes," said Duanying respectfully, but then he hesitantly asked, "Shutsuen, earlier I heard my martial siblings say that the disciples can leave the mountain and head home during the New Year and festival celebrations?" Shénnүү said, "That's right. If your home is in the towns near the foot of the mountain, you can even go back every month. No need to restrict your visits to just the New Year and festivals. If your home is farther away, then it's fine to go back once a year." "What if I don't have a home to go back to?" mumbled Duanying. Shénnүү was surprised. "As far as I know, aren't both of your parents still alive?" Duanying gave a pained smile. "I won't deceive Shutsuen. My blood mother was my father's concubine, and she passed away early. All my brothers and sisters are children of the main wife. I'm the only exception." "If that's the case, you don't need to go back if you don't wish to return," said Shénnүү gently. "In addition, I have two disciples who started earlier than you. Though they're younger, when you see them later, you should address them as Shishong. But they are both orphans without any parents. In the future, you must get along with them. You have many martial siblings on the mountain as well, so in the future, even if you don't go back home during the holidays, the mountain will still be very lively. Don't worry." He didn't have much experience as a Shifu, and the two disciples he'd admitted previously were still adolescents. As a result, he'd unconsciously used a half-coaxing tone, the kind one would use for children. Duanying found this both amusing and touching, and his heart grew even warmer. Duanying was originally from the Southern Kingdom. Though the Luling Duan family couldn't be considered a wealthy family, they were still a martial arts family of some renown within the local area. He shouldn't have needed to seek distant opportunities, even running thousands of miles to look for a master. But as Duanying told Shénnүү, every family had its own circumstances. Duanying was unwilling to endure their bullying, nor was he permitted to learn the martial arts reserved for the family's legitimate children. Instead, he simply bid farewell to them and left to search for a famous master. He'd gone to Lintruan Academy first. After all, Confucianism was prevalent in the Southern Kingdom, and many regarded Lintruan Academy as a sacred place for martial arts, especially the Academy Master, who was also the Shishong of the Southern Dynasty's Empress Liu. Lintruan Academy was even more prestigious in the South, with as many followers as clouds. But the more renowned the sect, the higher its standards. Duanying lacked both background and accomplishments. His aptitude wasn't particularly outstanding either, and so he was quickly eliminated in the initial examination stage. Still, he didn't give up, and after going to great pains, he finally got the opportunity to personally meet the Academy Master Yan Wushi and speak a few words with him. However, though Yan Wushi treated him kindly, he ultimately didn't agree to accept him as a disciple. Duanying understood that the man must have found his physical qualifications unsatisfactory. Before he encountered Shénnүү, Duanying thought all martial arts grandmasters in the world were like Yan Wushi and deeply valued talent and aptitude above all else. Therefore, when he came to Shénnүү Mountain, he no longer held any unrealistic hopes. He thought he'd be satisfied as long as he could become a disciple of Shénn� Mountain and honestly learn some martial arts. He hadn't expected to end up receiving such a joyous surprise. The loss Duanying had experienced led him to cherish this hard-won opportunity all the more, and he understood how rare a shifu like Shenqiao was. So, as not to disappoint his shifu, he would devote practically all his energy to martial arts. No one, least of all his parents, could have expected that this low-born son whom they neglected would, in a few years, become a martial arts grandmaster of his generation whose reputation shook the world itself. But that was a tale for later. At this moment, Duanying had just joined the sect, and he revealed a smile tinged with bashfulness at Shenqiao's words. "Thank you very much, Shutsun," he said. "Your esteemed self can rest easy and leave. This disciple will be sure to train properly and never disappoint your expectations. Please take care on your journey." Shenqiao patted his shoulder and gave a few more words of encouragement, and then let him leave. Due to this newly accepted disciple, he had to delay for another day, but things always came one after another. Not long after Duanying left, 2 more people arrived, each bringing him a message. The first was from Chunyang Monastery on Qincheng Mountain. Yipi-chun didn't know that Shenqiao was already the leader of Shénn� Mountain, so the message was simply addressed to the sect leader. Aside from some routine greetings, its contents were mainly about the scheduled duel between Yan Wushi and Hulugu. He invited the Shénn� Mountain sect leader to watch the battle together with him. From the Jianghu of the Central Plains, this battle would not only herald the birth of the world's #1 martial artist, it also signified a showdown between the martial arts of the Gokturks and the Central Plains. If Yan Wushi were defeated, his face wasn't the only one that would be lost. News of the battle at Banbu Peak had already spread. When the time came, many people would come to watch the battle in person. Even Yipi-chun had been swayed into watching. Others needed no mention. It was likely that all the renowned martial artists of the Central Plains would gather on Yinghui Peak to watch the battle on Banbu Peak. As a Taoist sect in the Central Plains, it was natural that Chunyang Monastery would get involved. Moreover, Hulugu had ruined the last sword trial conference midway through. Though Yipi-chun hadn't said anything, he wasn't happy about it. Yipi-chun had personally witnessed how terrifying Hulugu was. He thought to himself that his odds of winning against Shenqiao were 50-50, and yet Shenqiao was defeated by Hulugu. This meant he would not be his match. No matter whether it was Ru Yankehui, Guanglingsan, or Yuan Shushu, he believed that none of them would be able to match Hulugu either. The frightening part wasn't the idea of Yan Wushi alone losing to Hulugu, but the knowledge that, henceforth, no one in the Central Plains would be able to subdue Hulugu. Now that Tifengge was gone, there'd never be another Tifengge. Yu Shengyan had been in high spirits the day Shenqiao and Kunya dueled on Banbu Peak, but Yan Wushi had no interest whatsoever. When an expert reached his level, it wasn't difficult to infer who was stronger based on the information one had obtained beforehand. Of course, Yan Wushi wasn't some godly immortal either. Not even he could have expected that Shenqiao would fall from the cliff grievously injured. But this battle was completely different. On one side was the Gokturk's great master who'd lost by just one move to Tifengge, who'd been the #1 martial artist in the world. On the other side was the leader of a demonic sect who'd crushed Buddhist master Shi, someone who'd ranked second on Liuli Palace's rankings, and who'd also fought Tifengge once, many years ago. The two should have no relationship whatsoever. But now, due to the words Tifengge, a subtle connection had appeared between them. Who would win and who would lose? Perhaps no one, including themselves, knew the answer. Many people had the same thoughts as Yipi-chun, so this battle was sure to shake the world itself and draw all its eyes to the participants. The messenger Yipi-chun had sent was Su Chao. When he saw that Shenqiao had shown up on Shénn� Mountain, he was first shocked but quickly righted himself and congratulated Shenqiao. Then he apologized. "My master has yet to learn that Taoist Master Shen has regained his position as sect leader. Otherwise, he would have sent over a congratulatory gift." Shenqiao smiled. "Thank you very much, but there isn't much to congratulate on this matter. Please go back and tell your master that I'll meet him at Yinghui Peak on the 15th of March. Banbu Peak was treacherously steep, and the summit's terrain was even more cramped and rugged. Just fighting upon it was already a great test of skill. There was no space for anyone else to watch the fight. Those who wished to spectate would have to do so across from it on Yanhui Peak. After saying this, Sun Qiao thought about Madame Teen and her background, so he added, "Will Madame Teen also be going to watch the duel on Banbu Peak?" Su Qiao shook his head. "My mother said that the past is the past. She doesn't want to see her old acquaintances anymore. When the time comes, I'll go with my master. My mother probably won't be there." "I see," said Sun Qiao. "Then please pass my greetings to your mother and brother." Su Qiao smiled. "Of course." The two of them chatted for a while. Su Qiao understood that he must be terribly busy now as a sect leader, so he took the initiative to bid him farewell. However, he'd rushed all the way here from afar, so sending him back right after he'd delivered the message would be rather rude, so Sun Qiao asked him to stay for the night. He also called over the disciples in charge of welcoming guests, asking them to entertain him properly. The second message was delivered by an ordinary-looking girl. She claimed to be a Huan sect disciple who'd come on their sect leader's orders. Sun Qiao felt absolutely no goodwill towards Sang Jingxing. He'd only just severely injured the man on Shénn� Mountain, and now he had sent a messenger up the mountain. It was obviously not going to be anything good. However, Sun Qiao didn't want to embarrass a woman, and it was already too late for him to set off today. He decided that he might as well meet with the envoy from Huan sect. Unexpectedly, the first words out of her mouth were, "This one is Bing Xian, a disciple of Huan sect. I came here on orders for two things. First, to congratulate Taoist Master Shen on returning to power on Shénn� Mountain. Second, our sect will be holding a grand succession ceremony for our new sect leader in 10 days. The sect leader sent this one here to invite Taoist Master Shen to attend the ceremony." Sun Qiao was surprised. "Succession ceremony?" he asked. "Isn't your leader Sang Jingxing?" Bing Xian pursed her lips into a smile and said crisply, "Sect leader Sang has already passed away, so the position of sect leader was succeeded by sect leader Sang's disciple. Sect leader Bai said that she has a deep and unbreakable friendship with Taoist Master Shen, so for this succession ceremony, even if she invites no one else, she must absolutely invite you." With this smile, even her previously ordinary eyes shone with a hint of charm. For members of a sect, the death of their leader was naturally not something to be happy about, but this girl seemed jubilant. Although Sun Qiao also felt that Sang Jingxing's death was more than deserved, he found Bing Xian's words and actions somewhat odd too. Bing Xian seemed to sense his question. "I dare not dirty Taoist Master Shen's ears, but before joining Huan sect, Bing Xian was a woman from a good family who was kidnapped by Sang Jingxing and brought to Yichixue Temple," she explained. "We were set free only after Sang Jingxing's death, and sect leader Bai saw that I wished to learn martial arts and had decent aptitude and qualifications, so she let me officially enter the sect. On Shénn� Mountain, Sang Jingxing suffered grievous injuries due to Taoist Master Shen, and he passed away from his wounds not long after returning. The sect was left leaderless and in a panic. The sect leader considered the overall picture and chose to shoulder the responsibilities of leadership, taking on this heavy burden for the sake of the sect." She was extraordinarily silver-tongued. Everyone had been contending for the position of Huan sect's leader. Yet she described it like an inconvenience everyone was desperate to avoid, and thus Bai Zhong taking over as leader became an act of benevolence instead. Sun Qiao knew very well that though the injury Sang Jingxing had suffered was severe, the fact that he'd still been able to flee, combined with his abilities, meant that it shouldn't have been fatal. There was no reason he shouldn't have survived, unless... His heart jolted and met Bing Xian's quick-witted gaze. "Though Sang Jingxing is dead, there are other elders within the sect," he said. "Leaving aside the rest, Yuan Xushu's disciple Xiao should also be able to contend for the position. Didn't he object when Bai Zhong became the sect leader?" Bing Xian smiled. "The sect leader's position belongs to the capable. Those elders aren't as capable as sect leader, so they can only obey her orders. If they refuse, that means they're defying the sect leader and must be punished according to the rules of the sect. As for Elder Xiao, a wise man will submit to his fate. Since he is willing to devote himself to serving our sect, the sect leader will naturally elevate him." These words implied that Baizhong had already seized complete control of Hehuan sect, to the point that even Xiaosi was unable to stir up any waves and could only bow to her. Not only was Shen Qiao surprised, he also couldn't help but marvel at Baizhong's strength. Once, he'd seen a pitifulness buried with her cruelty and only thought she'd be better off if she could leave Hehuan sect. Little had he known that her intentions had lain elsewhere and that she'd rather swallow her humiliation and bide her time, waiting for an opportunity to spring from Sang Jingxing and Yuan Shushu's internal conflict. Secretly, bit by bit, she'd seized power for herself and, in the end, she finally emerged as the victor. "The sect leader still has some things to say," said Bing Xian. "She ordered me to tell them to Taoist Master Shen." "Please speak." Bing Xian cleared her throat. When she spoke again, it was in a voice that resembled Baizhong's. "Shenlang, I know you don't like the practice of pear cultivation with Hehuan sect. I wasn't able to change it in the past, but now that I'm the leader, I will naturally remove these practices, one by one. I've even freed all the beautiful girls Sang Jingxing captured and violated, and I'm letting them stay if they wish to do so. Are you satisfied with this? However, since the pear cultivation secret technique is a shortcut to martial arts training, many people are unwilling to give up the rich meat already in their mouths. I can't completely abolish it overnight. After all, there are still quite a few people in the sect waiting to see disaster befall me, so I must take it slowly. You must not look down on this one for this, nor find other excuses to avoid talking to her anymore." Her tone was sweet and agreeable, as if Baizhong was right before him, vivid and lively. If he closed his eyes, he might have even believed that Baizhong was the one speaking to him. Ever since Shen Qiao had entered the secular world, he'd begun to properly understand the ways of the world and its people. He wasn't made of wood, so how could he miss the feelings hidden within those words? But Shen Qiao knew very well that, though he was soft-hearted toward many people and many things, the only person he couldn't show that softness to at all was Baizhong. Otherwise, it would only harm them both and increase the injustices she'd received. "Please tell her this in my stead," he said. "Shénn� Mountain congratulates sect leader Bai on her succession. However, this humble Taoist is leaving tomorrow, so he's afraid he cannot attend her succession ceremony in person. He hopes that sect leader Bai can forgive him." Bing Xian looked at him for a moment, then suddenly sighed. "The goddess has affection, so why is King Xiang's heart like stone?" She'd been held captive by Sang Jingxing, so she naturally wasn't a naive maiden who knew nothing about the world. Due to her eloquence, Baizhong had sent her to pass on her words. She thought that her sect leader's tremendous beauty and martial prowess, combined with the sect leader's admiration for her beloved, and how she was willing to change the sect's tenets for him, would move any man in the world without fail. Even if he refused the invitation with righteous justifications, it wouldn't mean that his heart was completely unaffected. But this Taoist really did seem to have a heart of stone. He wasn't moved in the slightest. Even Bing Xian couldn't help but silently sigh for Baizhong. These sentiments were destined to be unrequited. "If I'm indecisive or my words ambiguous, I'd only be wronging her instead," Shen Qiao told her. Bing Xian had wanted to call him a hypocrite, but as she watched Shen Qiao, his Taoist robe free of mortal dust, his face serene, just like an immortal from a painting, she suddenly couldn't say it anymore. Instead, within her heart, she faintly understood, just a little, why sect leader Bai would like this man. It was love at first sight, and it will be my last. Now the world is but cold and gray." Perhaps, she thought, there would always be some people, some things in this world that were worth waiting and making sacrifices for. The next morning, Shen Qiao bid farewell to everyone on Shénn� Mountain and headed to Banbu Peak with Yu Shengyan. Yan Wushi had to leave for Chang'an to take care of the Huanyue sect affairs, so he couldn't accompany them. No matter who won this battle, Huanyue sect would have to carry on. Naturally, swords were blind. In a life-or-death battle like this one, it was highly likely that it'd conclude with someone breathing their last. If Yan Wushi died, it was hard to say whether Huanyue sect could even survive. Both Yan Wushi and Yu Shengyan all but refused to entertain this kind of possibility, but as the eldest disciple, Yan Wushi had no choice but to prepare for the worst possible outcome. Chapter 124. True Thoughts. Shenqiao had never imagined that he'd meet Yan Wushi again in this kind of situation. After listening to what Bian Yanmei had said earlier, though, Shenqiao said nothing. His mind couldn't fail to make the connection. When Yan Wushi had been at the peak of his martial strength, he might have been slightly inferior to Hulugu, but this slight gap didn't mean that the result was certain. The battlefield could change 1,000 times in an instant. When experts fought, the likes of timing, terrain, and the people themselves were all the more influential. Sometimes, one careless move or lapse in judgment might determine the outcome. But if the flaw in Yan Wushi's demonic core had yet to be repaired, this slight gap would widen, and his chance of defeat would increase. Shenqiao thought and thought, pondering it for a long time, but he couldn't think of any way to guarantee Yan Wushi's victory. Such a thing would be impossible in ordinary circumstances, let alone against someone like Hulugu. Even if his Shitsuan Qifengge came back to life, he couldn't be certain of his victory. In this way, he arrived outside the spare villa in Funing County, his mind full of worries. As he stood near the unlatched courtyard gates, he heard a lazy voice coming from inside. "No, A-Qiao, don't bite that." "A-Qiao? Don't bite?" Shenqiao was baffled. He pushed open the gates and entered. There, he saw Yan Wushi leaning half against a soft mattress inside the hallway, holding a jade jug filled with wine in one hand, propping himself up on the elbow of his other hand. His face oozed with satisfaction and leisure. Having heard the movement by the door, he raised his head and saw Shenqiao and Yu Shengyan enter. In front of him stood a fawn, the kind that couldn't yet walk steadily. It was making little bleating noises, like a lamb but slightly deeper. The fawn craned forward and bit the jade jug, playing a game of tug-of-war with Yan Wushi. Shenqiao stood there blankly for a moment. He'd never expected that someone who'd scheduled a duel with the world's #1 martial expert would have so little sense of urgency that he'd actually have the leisure to play with the fawn. "A-Qiao?" Seeing the new arrivals, Yan Wushi ignored Yu Shengyan and waved to Shenqiao. "You came just in time. I had someone open a jug of mulberry wine, one that I buried 10 years ago." The fawn thought he was calling it, and it released the jade jug to lean in. Yan Wushi pushed its head away, and its dark, moist eyes seemed a bit hurt. Shenqiao reached out and stroked it. The fawn didn't fear strangers. It leaned its neck and rubbed against Shenqiao's palm. Shenqiao suspected that he'd just heard wrong. He couldn't stop himself from asking, "Does it have a name?" "Yes, its name is A-Qiao." Shenqiao was speechless. Yan Wushi smiled. "Don't you think it looks a lot like you?" Shenqiao glanced at the fawn. It was a sika deer, still too young for its antlers to have grown in. Its ears were fluffy and pliable, and there was a tuft of white fur at the back of its neck. And there were its eyes, pure and innocent, full of trust and reliance on humans. But while it was adorable, Shenqiao couldn't see how it resembled himself at all. Putting that aside, he went straight to the point. "I heard that you challenged Hulugu to a duel." He phrased it as a question, but since he already knew the answer, these words were no more than an opening statement. "I did." These words were spoken very casually as well, as if Yan Wushi had agreed to go watch the flowers or snow rather than face a decisive life-or-death battle. Yu Shengyan had the good sense to not involve himself. After bowing to Yan Wushi, he went somewhere else in the villa, leaving only the two of them in the courtyard. Plus a deer. Shenqiao had rushed here, worn and covered in the dust of travel. At this moment, however, he found himself unconsciously influenced by Yan Wushi. His emotions gradually settled, and he sat down next to him. But his upright posture cut a clear contrast with Yan Wushi's casual one. Yan Wushi seemed a little amused. "Are you worried about me, A-Qiao?" The fawn thought he was calling it, and it trotted toward him on its little legs. Shenqiao watched in silence as Yan Wushi doubled over in laughter. "I have a proposition for Sec Leader Yan," Shenqiao said helplessly. Yan Wushi stopped laughing, and his eyes shone. "Oh, Sec Leader Shen is now a man of exalted status. What matter would require you to use the word proposition?" Shenqiao said slowly, "About your duel with Hulugu. How about I go in your place?" It was rare for anything to freeze Yan Wushi in surprise, even for a moment. He quickly recovered and said, You already fought him last time, and you lost. I know, said Shénnǔ, but 20 years ago he fought against my late master. 20 years have passed, and my master is no longer here. Logically, I should be the one to continue this battle in his stead. Yan Wushi suddenly smiled. In truth, you believe that I sent him that challenge letter in order to lure him away, to prevent him from heading up Shénnǔ Mountain and causing you trouble? I heard that the flaw in your demonic core has yet to be repaired, said Shénnǔ, and that the last fight you had with Xueting only aggravated it further. A hint of confusion flashed over Yan Wushi's face. Did Bianyame say that? Shénnǔ nodded. Yan Wushi sank into contemplation, pondering whether it was better for him to admit to his disciple's words or to simply claim that Bianyame had been lying. If he admitted to it, Shénnǔ would grow even more insistent on fighting Hulagu in his place. But if he said his disciple was lying, Shénnǔ would get angry. For the first time, Yan Wushi felt that having an overly capable disciple might not actually be a good thing. However, when issues arose, it was time for the disciple to work. And when blame was slung, it was, of course, for the disciple to carry. So he said, Last time, you checked my pulse as well. My injuries aren't serious. He extended his wrist. Shénnǔ smoothly placed his fingers upon it and briefly took his pulse. His expression was bewildered. If I look only at your pulse, your wounds do seem more or less healed. However, it's impossible to tell whether your demonic core has been repaired through this method. It's already healed. That confused Shénnǔ even more. Then Bianyame doesn't know that you're already healed? Perhaps. You could have avoided this battle, or at least delayed it for a little longer. In the end, it would still be for his sake. Yan Wushi smiled. He suddenly raised his chin by a fraction, then nodded at the begonia flowers nearby. What do you think of those flowers? They're splendidly beautiful, said Shénnǔ. The rich crimson is enchanting. Yan Wushi casually picked up a fallen leaf beside him. He flickered his finger, and a begonia blossom plopped to the ground. Another flick, and another begonia fell. Flying flowers and falling leaves could all become sharp weapons capable of harm. Yan Wushi's actions fully and incisively embodied this saying. After a few more flowers fell, Shénnǔ couldn't bear to continue watching. He grabbed the other man's wrist. What are you doing? Destroying the flowers. Yan Wushi's tone was still languid, his posture unchanging, but instead of shaking off Shénnǔ's hand, he let him hold it. The flowers were blooming perfectly well, and they've done nothing to provoke you, so why must you hurt them? Yan Wushi laughed. Look, A-Qiao, this is the biggest difference between you and me. In my opinion, those flowers have already bloomed to their finest form. If they continue to bloom, they'll only start wilting one by one. I'm sending them off. That way, their most beautiful moment will be the one that remains in my heart. Isn't that a good thing? His tone was careless, his wrist unmoving, letting Shénnǔ continue gripping it. Then he closed his fingers into a fist, made a squeezing motion, and those fallen leaves immediately crumbled into dust that fell through the cracks between his fingers. Many spend their days like dogs, baying at the slightest hint of profit. They struggle and plot for the smallest benefits, inviting trouble upon themselves again and again. This is the tragedy of the insignificant. People in the Jianghu speak of repaying kindness with kindness and enmity with enmity, but in truth, they do it to rid themselves of that tragedy. What is the point of living in this world if one cannot live grandly and splendidly, following one's heart's desires? People and flowers are the same. Back then, I was able to challenge Sui Youwang and Xifengge, so now I can naturally challenge Hulagu as well. Of course, the outcome of victor and defeated is uncertain. But it's precisely this suspense that makes it exciting. If the outcome was determined from the beginning, how would it be any different from a pool of lifeless, stagnant water? So though you are a factor in this battle, ultimately, it's mainly for myself. At this point, Shénnǔ naturally had no way to persuade him further. He knew very well that he and Yan Wushi had always been two people with completely different personalities. He valued steadiness and doing things step by step, while Yan Wushi loved the unexpected, to the point that he wouldn't hesitate to risk himself to pursue it. However, Yan Wushi did not consider his actions risky. He greatly enjoyed the process. Even if he were to die at Hulagu's hands, it wouldn't matter. This was how he wished to live his life. To many people, this attitude would seem overconfident to the point of wild arrogance, but this was precisely who Yan Wushi was. Just as Shenqiao was thinking this, he heard Yan Wushi say, "A-Qiao, do you know?" Shenqiao returned to himself. "In the past, I classified all humans into two categories." Said Shenqiao. He knew this. They were either your opponents or insects. Opponents were those who could stand on equal footing with him. Insects were the ones not worth his attention. In the past, Shenqiao had been an insect in his eyes. "But now," Yan Wushi said leisurely, "I've changed my way of thinking. A-Qiao, you're different from most people in the world. You have compassion for all mankind carved into your bones, to the point that you're willing to give yourself up for others without asking for anything in return. In the past, I thought you were the same as everyone else. You might start out good and innocent, but the world is fickle, and in the end, it teaches you to change as well. But you went completely beyond my expectations. Human affairs are like a stream, yet you are a rock. No matter how the stream flows, you will never shift." Shenqiao gave a brief laugh. "It's rare to hear Sect Leader Yan praise me. How remarkable. This humble Taoist is greatly honored. Do you still hold a grudge against me in your heart?" Shenqiao shook his head. "No, it's the exact opposite. I admire you greatly. There aren't many people in this world who can live so willfully, but Sect Leader Yan is one of them. Before I left the mountain, the only world in Jianghu I knew was the tiny little space that my late master had told me about. I'd never seen it with my own eyes. If not for Yan Wushi's instruction, I wouldn't be alive listening to you say these things now." Yan Wushi found that solemn, serious expression and tone of Shenqiao's incredibly adorable. He didn't suppress his desire to reach out and pat Shenqiao's head. "So you still won't admit that it looks like you?" he said. "Turn around and look at it." There were many intelligent people in the world, but those with self-awareness who were able to see their own flaws were much less common, and those who could discover their flaws and were willing to speak out about them to change themselves were rarer and more precious still. Shenqiao possessed an almost crystalline transparency. In truth, he understood completely, yet he was willing to view everything and everyone differently from him with kindness and clemency. Shenqiao was caught off guard by Yan Wushi's attempt to pat him on the head. His first instinct was to avoid it, then he subconsciously looked back at the fawn. The fawn's round, glossy eyes met his gaze, and their dark, moist surfaces reflected his figure within them clearly. Shenqiao's heart suddenly softened. He reached out and touched its neck, and the fawn lowered its head and licked his palm in response. Shenqiao couldn't help but laugh. "Thank you very much, A-Qiao." Who in the world would be fortunate enough to hear Sect Leader Yan express his gratitude? Shenqiao started a little, then turned to look at him. Yan Wushi smiled brightly as he gazed back at him. "Thank you for repaying my enmity with kindness, thus saving me." Oh my God. "I've already lost count of how many times you saved me, so shouldn't I say a word of thanks?" "You've saved me many times as well. There's no need to thank me." "So, our friendship has reached the point where we don't need to thank each other?" Yan Wushi said meaningfully. Shenqiao only felt that this statement seemed somewhat off, but couldn't quite put his finger on why. Yan Wushi suddenly reached out and grabbed him, then pressed him beneath his body. Only an expert would move so swiftly. Before Shenqiao could react, he heard Yan Wushi say, "You also know that I have countless enemies. You're the only person with whom I've shared any deep relationship. In this fight with Hulugu, it's hard to predict whether I'll survive, so I wanted to find someone I could entrust my orphans to. And you're the only person I could think of." His warm breath, only inches from Shenqiao, puffed right against Shenqiao's face, and he was left completely confused. He didn't know what to do first, push Yan Wushi away or respond to what he said. At that moment, his mind was completely blank. What do you mean, entrust your orphans?" Chapter 125. Before the Battle. Yan Wushi's question had caught Shenqiao's complete attention, and for a moment he failed to realize that they were still locked in a bizarre position. But there was no one to remind him. Yan Wushi was even less likely to do so than the fawn was. Yan Wushi's grave and solemn expression didn't help matters either. A smile had always lingered on his lips, all year long. Whether it was a small shadow of a smirk or wild, unrestrained laughter, it made it plain to see that he was a willful man who did as he pleased. Now, however, there was no trace of a smile on his face, and this absence imparted an imperceptible sense of intimidation instead. Unconsciously, the listener would restrain their other thoughts in order to focus on his words. Huanyue sect accepts disciples based on quality over quantity, Yan Wushi explained. So far, we only have 2 within our sect, Bian Mei and Yu. In terms of martial aptitude, Bian Mei isn't exceptional, only above average. His brilliance lies elsewhere. Qiao agreed with this assessment. Bian Mei's ability to handle various worldly, people-related affairs was indeed remarkable. Over the years, Huanyue sect had laid down extensive roots both within and beyond the court. Yun had tried with all his strength to attack and eliminate them. But now, with the establishment of the new dynasty, Huanyue sect had been able to quickly rejuvenate themselves, and Bian Mei's contribution had been key to this achievement. Even if Yan Wushi had the ability to do the same, he might not have had the patience. As for Yu, he possesses talents in martial arts, but he's too young. If I die, the 2 of them will be alone and isolated. If that happens, I want you to help watch over them a little. Qiao was stunned. If I die? Hearing these words, an unfamiliar feeling welled up within his heart, delicate and subtle. Outside the royal capital of Tuyuhun, Yan Wushi had been ambushed by 5 great experts. Despite rushing, by the time Qiao arrived, he'd already been lying unconscious on the ground. Qiao had believed he was dead, but at that time, although Qiao had lamented his passing, it only been due to his desire to settle the grudges and kindness between them and to mourn the death of a master martial artist of his generation. It was different from how he felt at this moment, with all these inexplicable emotions flooding into his heart. Yan Wushi saw his expression and sputtered a laugh in response. Are you feeling sad for my sake? Qiao collected himself. The flaw in your demonic core you spoke of has already been repaired, so you can go all out in your battle against Hulugu. Yan Wushi smiled. That's right. But all things have their expectations, and even more when the opponent is Hulugu. Or, based on your understanding of me, were you hoping I'd arrogantly announce that I will definitely win? Qiao smiled back. If Sect Leader Yan said that, I wouldn't find it surprising at all. He finally realized that their poses were rather inappropriate, and he couldn't help extending an arm to push Yan Wushi away, wanting to prop his body up. But Yan Wushi didn't budge at all. Not only did he refuse to move, he also pinned Qiao in place. He did this with incredible skill. Qiao was left completely unable to move, but at the same time, there was no feeling of being constricted or stifled. Qiao, thinking he was still waiting for his answer, said, I understand what Sect Leader has entrusted me with. I will do my best to protect them. If anything happens to Huanyue sect, as long as they don't do anything immoral or unethical, I will shield them with all my strength. In the Jianghu, a person's word was considered as valuable as 1,000 gold. With Qiao's character, this vow of his was even more priceless than that. The only thing that could prevent him from carrying out this unshakable spoken promise was his death. He thought about Yan Wushi's wording just now, though, of entrusting his orphans to him, and immediately laughed a little at the irony of it. Bian Mei and Yu, what about either of them came even close to being weak and alone? Even if you turned them loose in the Jianghu, the vast majority of people would just end up bullied by them. But even after Qiao's answer, Yan Wushi remained motionless. He asked, with a sincerity and warmth that Qiao had never heard before, A-Qiao, how can I repay you for your kindness? One should always treat friends with sincerity, Qiao replied. There's no need to repay me. Yan Wushi went on as if he hadn't heard him. Fame, wealth, and glory, those magnificent treasures that others can only dream of, are all worthless in your eyes. Qiao corrected him. That's not true. In fact, I also love fame, wealth, and glory. It is impossible for Shénn� Mountain to remain aloof from the world, and I wish to protect it. Therefore, I cannot remain aloof from the world either. In the Jianghu, strength is the most reliable of all. But Shénn� Mountain is also a Taoist sect. Since it is a Taoist sect, it's impossible for it to avoid all associations with the court. You helped me connect with Yangjian, which allows Shénn� Mountain to gain a foothold in Chang'an. I'm very grateful to you." Yan Wushi smiled slightly. This person had truly understood everything. "So fame, wealth, and glory are still useful," Shen Qiao said. "As long as one remains clear-minded and avoids being ensnared by them, that's enough." This concept was familiar to everyone, but avoiding ensnarement by these things was easier said than done. The Yu Ai and Tan Yuanquan of the past might have believed in such ideals as well, but which of them had been able to hold on to them in the end? "That's why you're special," said Yan Wushi. "These things are truly worldly possessions that you see as external to yourself. I've thought about it for a long time, but I couldn't think of anything that I can repay you with. So I can only repay you with myself. What do you say?" "Of course not." Shen Qiao was dumbfounded. When he saw Yan Wushi about to lower his head, he slammed a palm into his chest without hesitation. Yan Wushi grabbed for his wrist, but that meant he couldn't maintain his center of gravity and had to lean a little to one side. Shen Qiao's other hand chopped at his shoulder, and in an instant, the two of them had exchanged a couple of strikes. Shen Qiao took the chance to counterattack and flip them over, pinning Yan Wushi beneath him. Yan Wushi looked stunned. "So you like this kind of position? You should have told me earlier." His expression was truly as innocent as could be, with all of Taoist Master Shen's life experiences. Even if he didn't understand precisely what Yan Wushi was talking about, the suggestiveness within those words was clear. Now he fully believed that the man's demonic core must have been repaired long ago. Otherwise, how could he have the leisure to mess with others when there was such a huge battle looming ahead? Shen Qiao reached out to seal his acupoints, but Yan Wushi naturally wouldn't let him. Hands flew. In the blink of an eye, they'd exchanged a couple more blows, each move carrying a bloodless edge. They were both experts who ranked within the top 10. Shen Qiao might have been a little weaker, but not by much. Yan Wushi simply gave up resisting and let himself open to Shen Qiao's palm strike. Sure enough, Shen Qiao started and couldn't bring himself to attack. Yan Wushi seized the opportunity and pinned Shen Qiao beneath him again. There was a beauty in his arms, and it'd be difficult to find another one like him even if he scoured the entire world. But what enthralled Yan Wushi wasn't his appearance. All those who'd interacted with Shen Qiao knew that this man had a heart that was tolerant and broad-minded, like an ocean that embraced the rivers. It was a heart that remained unshakable despite being buffeted by the many storms of life. However, he never inflicted his own pain on others either. Normally, he'd be the gentlest, most amiable of friends, yet in critical moments, he was the most trustworthy and reliable of companions, one who'd live and die by your side. Shen Qiao hadn't been wrong. In the past, Yan Wushi believed that, aside from his disciples, there were only two types of people: opponents and insects. However, Shen Qiao's presence within his heart now clearly excluded him from these two categories. Not only that, it was far, far weightier, to an extent that even Bian Mei could never imagine. It didn't matter when his mindset had changed. What was important was that Shen Qiao had slowly dropped his guard and was willing to treat him as a friend, to the point that he'd even be willing to make such a heavy promise to him, for him. But this wasn't enough. To Yan Wushi, it was far from enough. What he wanted was to be peerlessly special, one of a kind in all of heaven and earth, and he didn't want the kind of standing that others could easily imitate or seize. He'd always been an imperious person. If he wanted something, he must have the best, and no one could be capable of replacing him. But Yan Wushi did not display these thoughts excessively. Forget using force to get his way. Compared to the methods he'd used in the past, his current actions were overflowing with tenderness. All of this was because he knew Shen Qiao too well. This person looked soft and gentle, but he possessed a core more unyielding than anyone else's. Even slightly excessive methods might make Shen Qiao disdain him and push him further and further away. Look at Yu Ai. His mistakes couldn't have made for a clearer lesson on this. So Yan Wushi had deviated from his usual behavior. He'd slowly, gradually lured Shen Qiao into his trap. Not only was he not intense, he hadn't even sealed Shen Qiao's acupoints during their short fight just now. If he sealed them, he could force Shen Qiao into a passive position, make him listen. But what would be the point of that? Naturally, there'd be no point. Therefore, as Shenqiao was amenable to coaxing but not coercion, losing the advantage to Yan Wushi again was completely reasonable. I don't want anything, so I can only give myself, Yan Wushi said. Is even that still not enough? With their current poses, Yan Wushi should have been arrogantly looking down at him and oozing with superiority, but Shenqiao could actually see a hint of hurt and compromise in his grin. He was instantly both annoyed and amused. Yan Wushi slowly lowered his head, his tone soft and gentle. Do you remember what happened back in the cave? Shenqiao only remembered 2 incidents involving caves. The first was when Yan Wushi had fought nàihé. Shenqiao had thought he was injured and followed him into the cave, and Yan Wushi almost strangled him. The second was when Yan Wushi had used Shénn� Tongbei to scale fish. When he recalled these memories, Shenqiao's expression darkened. Please let go, Secretary Yan. I'm not used to speaking to others like this. There aren't any outsiders. Don't worry. Yan Wushi smiled and picked him up, half pinning him against the wall. This moved Shenqiao from a lying posture to a sitting one, but he was still half trapped in Yan Wushi's arms. He said nothing. Yan Wushi hadn't sealed Shenqiao's acupoints either. The important thing was that if he wished to break free, he'd have no choice but to fight Yan Wushi. If he went easy on him, Yan Wushi would easily negate his attacks. If he used actual force, Yan Wushi would simply give up resisting and leave himself at Shenqiao's mercy. That considered, Shenqiao wouldn't be able to bring himself to attack. This was truly... Dead pigs were unafraid of boiling water. If someone was shameless and unscrupulous enough, they'd have nothing to fear. I'm already about to die, said Yan Wushi. Do you lack even the patience to listen to a few words for me? Shenqiao sighed and gave up struggling. Say them then. Yan Wushi smiled. But just now, I thought about it. No matter how much I say, it won't compare to just doing it. He kept hopping from one thought to the next, and Shenqiao couldn't keep up at all. Huh? He said blankly. Then he was unable to make any sounds. His voice cut off suddenly, and a shadow obstructed his line of sight. Something hot and soft landed on his lips. Yan Wushi pried his teeth right open, then dove straight in. A short yell came from the side. Yu Shengyan stood in the doorway. The fawn stood behind him, biting into the corners of his robes. As a result, when he tried to back away and leave, he almost tripped over the fawn. Shenqiao slammed a palm into Yan Wushi's shoulder, his waist straightening a little as he leapt up gracefully, no longer restrained, but his lips were slightly red and swollen, and the hair at his temples was mussed. Even his complexion looked unnatural, with shame overlapping with anger. It was impossible to discern if he was more humiliated or more furious. But with his current appearance, even if he wished to be dignified, it was impossible. Yu Shengyan saw his Shitsuan's airy gaze slant over to him, and he longed to just bash his head open against the pillars of the colonnade. Normally, with his martial prowess, he wouldn't have made such a mistake. He could only blame his own terrible timing. He'd just been strolling around the villa, thinking that the two of them should have already finished their conversation and he could go and greet Shitsuan. But who knew that he just happened to run into a scene that shouldn't have been seen? What bad luck! Yu Shengyan gave a dry chuckle. Can we just pretend that I was never here? He no longer had the courage to greet his master. He turned around and quickly fled, running as far away as he could. Da Shishong, is it not too late to go back and seek refuge with you in Chang'an? Wah! Oh my gosh, you guys! I need to get it together so I can talk. That was so cute! Okay. I'm sorry you guys are literally just listening to me laugh right now. But that was adorable. That whole little last chapter. Actually, both the last 2 chapters. This chapter before the battle was so cute. And it just goes to show... Okay. I think I've gotten myself together enough. So, as I was trying to say, this chapter shows that Shenqiao actually does have romantic feelings for Yan Wushi, and he just hasn't realized it yet, which It's understandable because he's never even pursued something like that before or even thought of something like that. But I honestly love the moments of sincerity between him and Yan Wushi, especially on Yan Wushi's end. Even though, he still had his funny little moments, he was actually serious with Shen Qiao and expressing, number one, how much he valued him and how Shen Qiao changed his perspective. Maybe not necessarily on everyone, but at least on him, and how he actually liked who Shen Qiao was as a person. And oh my God, on page 191, or was it, no, 181, when he told Shen Qiao, "Thank you for repaying my enmity with kindness, thus saving me." Oh my God. Those words just hit me to the core. The other thing I wanted to mention was about Yan Wushi being so in love with Shen Qiao. Like, it's just unmistakable, even if the word love has not necessarily been said yet. But let's start with this fawn that he got, who he decided to name A-Qiao. Clearly, this man is deeply in love with Shen Qiao. And then I also think about, it happened in this chapter, but it's happened several times throughout the past couple of books, where he would willingly let Shen Qiao touch his gate of life. And as we know from earlier books, that is, a very important part to people in the Jianghu, that they won't just let people randomly touch or anything like that. So for him to just on so many occasions just put his arm over and let Shen Qiao do that, it shows, I guess that shows more trust. But I'm throwing the love in there because, he ain't letting nobody else do it. Not even his disciples. And I'm sure he knows his disciples have no malice toward him whatsoever. So I think, honestly, it goes beyond just trusting Shen Qiao. And then there's this upcoming battle with Hulugu, which of course we know a lot of that has to do with who Yan Wushi is as a person, who loves the excitement of battle and just doing whatever he wants in life, which he, expressed his reasonings for fighting Hulugu, and then even admitted that only just a small portion of it was for Shen Qiao. But speaking of love and romance, I really, really respect Shen Qiao, because Baizhong sent her little lady Bingxian, something like that, to, basically express her affections without directly saying it. And Shen Qiao was like, I need to make this as clear as possible, because this lady has already suffered so many things just being a part of Hehuan sect and the craziness going on in there. I don't want her to suffer matters of the heart. Even though she's doing great now, he didn't want to be a part of any sufferings that she had, which of course he's going to be because she's getting rejected. But it's better to reject her and she still have that, care and respect, rather than he lead her on. And so he straightened that out right away. And I absolutely have so much respect for him. But speaking of that, I wanted to come to you guys with something specifically that Bingxian had said, and that was, the goddess has affection. So why is King Xiang's heart like a stone? There's a footnote at the bottom that's telling you exactly where that comes from, and it has the Mandarin translation for it. And so I don't know, randomly decided maybe I'd share that with you guys. Maybe that's something you want, maybe not. You can let me know in the comments. Anyway. So I'm going to say it slowly, mostly because it'll be my first time saying it too. But anyway, the first part is going to be 神女有心, 奈何 xiāng wángxīnrú铁石. So that's very slowly. Now I'm going to say it a little faster, but we're going to break it up into parts, okay? The first part, the goddess has affections, 神女有心. The second part, nàihé xiāng wángxīnrú铁石. So if there's anyone who actually wants that broken down so you can know how to say the full thing in its capacity, just let me know in the comments and I'll make a separate shorter video. Otherwise, I'm going to leave it right here. But I'll go ahead and say it once more. Slowly first. 神女有心, 奈何xiāng wángxīnrú铁石. And then a little bit faster, because even I can't speak that fast saying certain things. 神女有心, 奈何xiāng wángxīnrú铁石. The goddess has affection. So why is King Xiang's heart like stone? All right, everyone. The next time we meet each other, we will be reading the last 3 official chapters before we move into the epilogues and side stories and extras and everything. So you all have a blessed day or night, and 我爱你们.